Hey everybody, it's Dr. Hyman. How you doing? I'm so excited to have you with me today because we're going to be talking about my favorite subject, which is sugar. And we have an incredible guest today, which is a professor from University of Southern California, professor of pediatrics, who's written a new book called Sugarproof, which is pretty cool because it would be amazing if we could all get sugar-proof. He'll be on shortly, and he's the program director for diabetes and obesity at the Saban Research Institute, and he holds a Robert Atkins and Veronica Atkins chair in childhood obesity and diabetes, which is pretty amazing because Robert Atkins was pretty extreme on the no sugar front. Remember all the Atkins diet. He's also the co-director of the USC Diabetes and Obesity Research Institute, and he's done some amazing work in terms of childhood obesity for the last 30 years, looking at the metabolic factors that are linked to increasing obesity in kids as a risk for, later on disease, and what happens when you start feeding kids crap when they're little. How does it affect their growth, development, and how do we actually translate that into clinical policies, into federal policies, and so forth. So I'm super excited to actually have this guest, Michael Goran, come on, and hopefully he'll be here very shortly. I don't know if he's here, but I don't see him. Might give him a little note. But it's just such an important topic. Sugar in kids is just such a big issue, and I just feel like we really need to get real about this and start to think about how we can really address this epidemic of obesity in kids. It's basically 40% of kids who are overweight or obese. Their futures are threatened. They live poor, cheaper lives, sicker lives. They tend to earn less money. They tend to have more chronic illness. If you're obese as a kid, your life expectancy is 13 years less. Can you imagine that? 13 years less. And there's 40% of kids who are at risk for this. So it's a big issue. Let me just see if I can find out how to get him on. I will quickly send him a text and say we're on and see if we can get him on. Wonders of Instagram Live. So I'm super excited because this book is, I think, groundbreaking. It's called Sugarproof. It's an incredible map of what is really going on with sugar in this country and obesity and the targeting of children and the amount that they drink. I mean, some kids have 34 teaspoons of sugar a day. We used to have 22 teaspoons of sugar a year, which is pretty, it is a lot even then, but now we're just drowning in sugar, about 152 pounds per person per year, and that includes kids. Let me just try to find if I can reach him and maybe come back to you guys in a little bit. I really don't see him anywhere. And hopefully he'll join. Oh, here we go. Sugarproof. Here he is. It's coming on now. He should be. Oh, Michael.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon.
How are you? We were waiting for you. I was like, what happened?
I had 10:30 on my schedule.
Oh,
so,
really? Okay. Well,
yeah.
that's fine. We can do this now. This is great. I just already did your intro. I already promoted your book. We're all good. I'm really
Thank you
excited.
so much.
I'm really excited to have you on and to chat a little bit about your new book, Sugarproof. You've been on this train a long time, way longer than most, 30 years of looking at childhood obesity. And I can imagine it's been a pretty disheartening moment because when you started, it was bad, and now it's terrible. I think what were since those 30 years happened, what is the increase in the rate of obesity in kids? It's tripled or something like that? It's crazy, right?
But yeah, it's definitely gone up. When I started back in the late 90s, we're talking about really pudgy children, not really of any medical concern. And in the late 90s, we started seeing type 2 diabetes emerge in children, and now fatty liver disease, the metabolic complications. And the levels now are very much dependent on where you're looking. So for huge economic disparity. For example, in Los Angeles, we're talking 5% in affluent areas versus 35% in some low-income areas.
Wow, 35% obesity
yeah,
rates in kids.
yeah, and starting, young in life by age 2 or 3 of age. So it really depends on which window you're looking through in terms of answering that question.
It's terrifying to me because, I think your work has sort of outlined a lot of the implications for the next generation. Because, being overweight is one thing, but, and there's the social stigma from that. I remember reading once that if you're an overweight kid, it's worse than being like in a cripple in a wheelchair in terms of the social stigma, in terms of how people treat you and relate to you and interact with you. Although now, I don't know, it's such a common issue, so I don't know how it's changed. But talk to us about some of the issues that you see from kids and even in the prenatal exposures to sugar and processed food, and what that does to these kids developmentally, in terms of their academic performance, their intellectual capacity, their future health, their future earning capacity, all these things which we know are impacted by what happens to these kids in childhood.
Sure, yeah, and actually somebody's just asking that very question there on the feed sugar in pregnancy. And this process it starts with exposures to sugars in utero. In fact, one of the original titles of this book was Secondhand Sugars, which was to do with how sugars can get transmitted from the mother to the infant, either in utero or during lactation. And so there's definitely an early developmental aspect to this. And by the way, that effect of sugars in utero is also the same with alternative sweeteners during pregnancy, which can increase the risk 2 to 3-fold of obesity in childhood by 1 or 2 years of age.
So wait a minute. So you're saying if a mom has some Diet Coke and diet drinks, and that's actually artificial sweeteners are also a risk for obesity. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I wish I could give you a good answer to that. We're just launching some new studies in that area to look at actually why that works. But there's several large epidemiological studies, including Project Viva, the large study from Boston, that basically these are birth cohort studies or pregnancy cohort studies that look at diet during pregnancy and then track the offspring. And also studies from Europe have shown the same thing, that when a mother is consuming 2 or 3 servings per day of diet beverages, which happens quite a bit also when women get gestational diabetes, which is not uncommon during pregnancy. The doctor may suggest removing sugar and going alternative sweeteners. How does it work? We're looking obviously at effects of sweeteners on the microbiome, on brain development. We know from animal studies that any sweetener during pregnancy can magnify the innate preference for sweetness that babies are born with. So babies are born with a preference for sweetness as a protective mechanism, but that can be multiplied by exposure to sugar or sweeteners during pregnancy.
Yeah. So in other words, it affects their metabolic health some way, but also makes them more likely to want more sugar when they get out. They come out pre-addicted, essentially, sort of like a heroin addict's kid comes out already addicted to heroin.
Well, it's supposed to be a protective mechanism because from an evolutionary perspective, it was designed to promote breast milk liking, which is sweet, and to avoid toxic foods from the forest floor. But now the toxic foods are the grocery store, 70% of processed foods having added sugar. So this protective mechanism is backfiring against us in today's highly sweet food environment.
And how does it affect these kids, academic performance and behavior? Because we're seeing, increasing struggles with academic performance in kids. We're seeing in America, I think we're 31st in reading and math. And I think in the world, like Vietnam's like 21st or something, and they have 1% obesity rate. And then you have the issues around behavior and sugar, which and on our processed food in general, and the nutritional deficiencies that go along with that. I don't think people understand that a lot of the behavioral issues we're seeing in kids, and the ADD, and the disruptive behavior, and the violence, and the aggressiveness, that may be related to diet. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can talk a lot about it,
Okay,
but I'll
talk a lot
try.
about it. 'Cause I think
I'll
it's
try to.
important. It's people, oh my
Yeah,
God, I'm overweight. What's the big deal? But it is a big deal. But there's other issues that
yeah.
people
No,
struggle
no.
with,
Yeah, and
like depression.
we talk a lot about it in the book, and there's not a lot of evidence for this, but there's certainly a good degree of evidence on all those fronts that you just mentioned. So, in terms of academic performance, for example, several fairly large studies show the impact of also going back to maternal consumption or childhood consumption of sugars, and in particular sugary beverages, affecting academic performance in children starting at a relatively young age. And we have a paper coming out any day now showing effects of that from maternal consumption, even during breastfeeding, because of the likelihood of transmission of the sugars from maternal consumption through breast milk. So fructose does get transmitted, sugars do get transmitted across the placenta and through breast milk, and can impact brain development.
Wow.
And furthermore, studies, hard to do these studies in humans, but in animal studies, my colleague Scott Konowski at USC basically has shown that high sugar consumption during adolescence in a rat, and yes, rats also go through adolescence for a short period, impacts memory. And what he's shown is that it's time sensitive. So if you expose a rat just during adolescence to sugar and then take it away, they have the same memory impairments when they become adult. So it's permanent rewiring of the brain that can occur. And he's also shown that that can be attributed to inflammation in the brain, as well as potentially through the gut microbiome changes.
So what you're saying essentially is that if you eat sugar as an adolescent, it's going to affect you lifelong, even if you stop eating it.
That's what the animal studies suggest. We don't have human studies to back that up at this point. The point is, and the point that we make in Sugarproof is that kids are more vulnerable to the effects of high sugar because things are much more they're much more dynamic. Brains are being built, fat cells are being developed, stem cells are being evolved into different types of cells, and those pathways of development can be derailed by whatever nutrients or toxins that they're exposed to.
That's incredible. So essentially what you're saying is these kids have the food that's programming their biology for the long term. So it's not like, oh, he's just a kid, let him have sugar. No, it's a much more serious long-term thing you're doing to your kid by letting him indulge in all kinds of crap and sugar when they're little. I mean, what about things like fructose and other sweeteners like monk fruit? And people are asking a lot of questions about that. And what about fruit and fruit sweeteners? Is that okay?
Yeah, so one of our mottos is that we should be eating fruit, not drinking it. The fruit juice is problematic because the sugars from fruit, predominantly fructose, become highly concentrated and liberated from the cell wall. You throw out the fiber, and you basically get the concentrated amount of fructose that you'd get from eating 3 or 4 apples in a glass of apple juice. So nobody's eating 3 or 4 apples all at once. So it's perfectly fine to eat an apple or even 2 apples throughout the day. I wouldn't eat them all at once. And it's to do not just with the amount of fructose, but the rate at which it's absorbed into the body, because the body has a very specific limit in terms of how much fructose it can be absorbed. At small levels of fructose consumption like you'd get from eating a piece of fruit, some of it can get converted to glucose. But when there's a high amount of fructose coming in quickly, that metabolic capacity becomes overwhelmed. And that's when fructose gets taken up by the liver and gets converted to fat.
Yeah. And I see, a lot of research recently that looked at the effect of fructose on the gut, and particularly gut permeability or leaky gut, which causes a lot of inflammation in the body. And I remember sitting with Bruce Ames, who was a really legendary scientist who studied a lot about nutrition. And he told me that they were finding in animal studies, literally the fructose requires, and I don't know if this is true or not, because the fructose requires more energy to be absorbed by the body and uses up the energy called ATP in the gut. And that causes little, these sort of tight junctions, which are basically like Legos, the cells are stuck together, that require energy to keep sticking together, and then they come apart, and you get this leaky gut driving inflammation. Do you know about this research on the leaky gut and the fructose?
It's certainly, yeah. I mean, again, mostly animal studies, limited human studies, but leaky gut can be driven by high fructose, and again, it's to do with the amount, the dose, and the rate at which it's coming in to the system. Now, there's another problem in infants and babies. So remember, I'm looking through all this through the eyes of a baby or a child, and babies aren't even born with the capacity to absorb fructose. So
They're not.
they're not. No, the GLUT5. There's only one receptor for the gut to absorb fructose, and that's called the GLUT5. There's a dozen for glucose because we need glucose everywhere in the body for energy. We're not even born with the capacity to absorb fructose. So if a baby is getting exposed to fructose, you're going to get malabsorption and digestive problems just because of the malabsorption.
Mm.
So tummy problems in young kids could be due to sugars, fructose in particular. And then, once they get more exposed to fructose, then the receptors get turned on, and then you get all the other problems that are associated with fructose. And you mentioned fruit sugars. So this is not just from fruit juice, but there's probably most of your viewers know about high fructose corn syrup, which is for a long time the main culprit. But now we're seeing a proliferation of other fructose-based sugars that sound quite healthy, like fruit juice concentrates or apple juice concentrate. I mean, basically these are evaporated grape juice. These are just basically concentrated sugar from the juice of an apple or a grape, and it's basically higher in fructose than high fructose corn syrup.
Actually.
Yeah,
That sounds healthy. Yeah. I mean, I noticed a lot of people commenting. They're like, "What about monk fruit? What about this? What about stevia? What about baking? What should I use?" And I think, what about honey? What about maple syrup? And I think it sort of speaks to a really common problem, which is that we are so addicted to sugar that it's biologically addictive. And then when people start hearing cut sugar, they have this panic attack in their brain. Like, what am I going to do instead? How am I going to, survive without sugar? And it's so funny because we just never, as a species, really consumed this much into the last, 150 years. It was a really rare, thing to actually get sugar or sweets. And I think we really are in a crisis moment now because we're seeing this society just basically, in my view, a lot of our global problems are driven by our food system, by the food supply. Whether it's our agricultural products, which are mostly turned into processed food like high fructose corn syrup and refined flours and refined oils, or whether it's the chronic disease that's a consequence of that, the climate change that's caused by the way we're growing food. I mean, it's all connected. And I think people are so hooked into this. How do we get unhooked? And how do you advise parents who just are like struggling? Well, what am I going to give my kids? And what about, baking? What about other sweeteners? And what about, what do I do? And I think, and how do you not make your kids crazy by, having a little nothing at home, but then going out and, binging and everything?
Yeah, great questions. And can you hear me okay? My screen's a little frozen.
Yeah, you're a little frozen, but I think I can hear you fine. Uh-oh. Are you there? Oh, now you're back. Okay, good. So I can hear you now and you're not frozen. I can't hear you actually. Your audio went off. Maybe it's your AirPods. Mm-mm. You there? Uh-oh. Are you back? I can't hear you, but I can see you. Do you want to get off and I'll invite you back in, maybe? Hmm. Hmm. All right. Maybe your AirPods. need to get connected. All right, well, he left, but it's a great conversation, isn't it? And it's pretty scary when you actually look at the science of what's happening around sugar and kids and our overall health as a population. It's pretty frightening. I'm really pretty excited that we get to have this incredible guest on our Instagram Live. He should be coming back now. We can kind of finish the conversation. Right.
Hello?
There we go. Now I can
Yeah.
hear you. There we go. We're back in business. All right.
I don't know. I think we got overwhelmed with all the questions
Oh,
coming
maybe,
in.
yeah.
It's just that
Okay. Well,
there's so many great questions, and I wish I could answer them all. But you're basically asking, what should parents do? And yeah, and so the first half of the book is all about the science of sugar and all the effects we were just quickly talking about. The second half is the how-to, and we have a 7-day plan for no added sugars. Basically, we will walk families through how to talk to kids, how to go through their pantry and meal planning for a 7-day period. It's much like your sugar detox plan that you used many years ago.
yeah.
But it's family based. So we're dealing with busy parents with busy families. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you get kids intrinsically motivated to take part? What are their motivations?
Yeah.
And we come up all kinds of hacks and tips about cutting sugar, depending on exactly what the individual concerns are. Breakfast is a big deal for us because most kids
Cereal.
like and need breakfast, and breakfast cereal. So we have a breakfast plan that we talk about, how basically simple fixes for breakfast cereal or oatmeal or toast or pancakes. You can still have pancakes and enjoy them. You don't have to drown them in sugar to enjoy pancakes. So there's lots of different.
Isn't like flour just as bad as sugar? I mean, the glycemic index of flour is worse than sugar. So biologically,
and you can hack that too. And we suggest putting in an extra egg white, using a little bit of almond flour or other protein or other fibers in with it to kind of offset that glycemic index.
Yeah.
So there's
I make
ways
the
you can get
cashew
around
waffles. It's just cashew in a blender with some like almond milk and some eggs, and there's no flour, and it comes out to be these amazing cashew waffles.
Those sound great.
They're great. You can put a little fruit on it if you want. You don't have to drown in sugar. I think there are a lot of hacks, and I think you sound like you have a lot of those in your book, which is really good. So what would be like a breakfast that would be okay for a kid that wouldn't be a high glycemic breakfast?
Yeah, we have one of my publisher challenged us to come up with 101 breakfast ideas for kids. So we have we have that plan. So
101, that's a lot.
Yeah. We went through, international breakfasts. International breakfasts tend to be low in sugar. Like we have a recipe on our website for savory Korean pancakes. We can do an oatmeal
for Japan, right?
Yes. There's eggs, scrambled eggs, boiled eggs, sprinkled with furikake, something to kind of give it a bit of added flavor or nutrients. Lots of different ideas about how you can fix breakfast
I mean,
because the problem is
in general is not a healthy breakfast for kids, right? I mean, it's just breakfast cereal is probably the greatest hoax perpetrated on America. Like that's a hoax.
But if your family likes breakfast cereal and you need a quick fix, I mean, there's plenty of options on the market that are low in sugar and high in fiber, and kids will eat it. Studies show that actually, that if you give kids the choice of a low sugar cereal or a high sugar cereal, on the high sugar cereal arm, they'll eat it and they'll serve themselves bigger portions of it. On the low sugar, if you serve it with berries or fruit, they're perfectly happy and they'll eat it just as fine. Topping it with berries or chopped fruit or sprinkled fiber. So if you are going to serve cereal, make it fun and make it so that kids can kind of make a little project out of it, because kids like that, to
Yeah.
kind of sprinkle it and top it with stuff, and you
And,
can
and
increase
there
the
are
nutrient
cereals that are
quality.
made without grains, right? So there's cereals that are made with nuts and seeds and other things that actually don't have a lot of it. They have more fat and more protein, so they're not problematic as much. How do you sort of deal with the sort of phenomenon of like parents over restricting their kids and creating a backlash, these kids wanting to go out and binge on sugar, and how do you deal with that?
So our philosophy is we're and we had to be very careful about this, because we know that if you're over restrictive, it will backfire. And so we didn't want to backfire with the public either. We don't want to be seen as the sugar police. We're not calling for complete eradication of sugar and sweet treats. But what we are saying is that we need to get it under control and reset our kids' taste palates, so that they're not drowning in sugar every day, so that they can enjoy sweet treats and become self-regulators. So we talk a lot in the book about raising kids who learn how to self-regulate on sugar, so that they can enjoy sweet treats and not overdo it. And I think we're overwhelmed with so much sugar that we've forgotten that it actually is
Yeah.
supposed to be a sweet treat to enjoy or to celebrate. And that's perfectly appropriate. And certainly in our house, we have lots of sweet treat celebrations. But
And
I
then if
think
you
there's
have it at
ways
the
to
end of a
do
meal
that.
as opposed to the beginning of the meal and in your stomach, it's actually better, right? Because it doesn't get
Yes,
absorbed as fast
yes.
and doesn't cause the same metabolic issues.
End of the meal, and just making small adjustments, like serving it on a smaller plate, or serving smaller portions, or making it a special moment for certain days of the week. I was just listening to your podcast this morning, actually, with Dr. Chatterjee.
Oh, yeah.
He had some great tips. Very similar approach, where you're making small adjustments to behaviors. Emily, my co-author, by the way, she trained in health behavior. I worked in the preventive medicine department for 20 years. So we have a very strong focus on health behavior, and we know it's not as simple as just providing information. We can't just tell families, hey, you got to cut sugar. We talk about intrinsic motivation. Kids have to be internally motivated for whatever reason that drives them, whether that's better skin, performing
Acne, sugar and
better.
acne is a big
Yeah.
link.
Yes.
Kids love that
Yes.
one.
Yes.
You can get a kid to
Yes.
stop sugar, but you got pimples as an adolescent. But what you're saying is that really it's important to start in the womb, prenatally, and then early on. It's really important. And what's really interesting is that the new dietary guidelines being proposed recommend that no sugar be given to babies from 0 to 2, and then really limited amounts as children. And in Mexico, they just passed a law that prohibits and makes illegal the selling of soda and junk food to kids, which I thought was really groundbreaking, because they're seeing, here 1 in 10 adults has type 2 diabetes. There 1 in 10 kids has type 2 diabetes. So how do we advise our population? I mean, what is what we should be doing for our future generations? Because we're really abdicating the responsibility of taking care of our future generations by ignoring the amount of junk and soda and sugar in our diets.
Yeah, well, you've written a book on it. I'm halfway through it, Food Fix. I mean, I think there's fundamental issues at hand here in terms of the food system, and food marketing to children, which I think, countries like Mexico and Chile have taken a proactive role in that. I don't know if that's ever going to happen in this country. Sugar taxes, I think, are working to a small extent in terms of nudging people to consume less. But again, that's problematic in this country. There are some sugar taxes, but we need large scale changes. Is that going to happen overnight? No. So we are trying to start by just educating families, not just about the dangers of sugar, but just providing them simple tools where they can adjust their daily lives, hacking out sugar. So we need fundamental changes in the food system, as you've talked about and written about
So if
at the
if
higher
you were
level.
like the food czar, and you wanted to protect our children, knowing what you know as a doctor who's been studying childhood obesity and sugar for 30 years, what would be your top few actions that you would take?
Yeah,
And hopefully, in the
well,
next
I think it
administration,
would.
we're going to have that person. So,
Yes, I hope so. Um, well, I mean, I think the food marketing is a big problem. Uh, Directly targeting of to children. It's basically a replay of cigarette tactics and media approaches to sell highly processed food to infant children. I think starting with formula and transition foods. I, I, I think this new added sugar limitation for 0 to 2 years of age hopefully will make impact. Food industry has always found ways around these things, like corn syrup solids, which may technically not be an added sugar,
right.
but is used pretty broadly. So we definitely need better unified approaches to defining what's healthy, what's not healthy. I think food warning labels and marketing is working in countries like Chile and now in Mexico, and we need that here. We need overhauling of the farm bill and subsidies for making fruits and vegetables more readily available and high quality, as opposed to sodas, which are cheaper than or cheaper than water.
Yeah, it's true. Making the good choice is the healthy choice is the hard choice, and making the bad choice is really the easy choice in our society. It's so powerful.
But parents can do that. They can do that in their own house, in their own refrigerators. I mean, especially right now, since more people are home more often. We have a chance to change what's in our environment. One of the first things you can do if you're trying to get your kids off juice or soda is just don't buy it.
Yeah.
Don't buy it and bring it into the home, and keep a bottle of water in the fridge.
Yeah.
And it'll be painful for a day or two. And coming back to one of your earlier questions, when
Yeah, I
kids
think it's
come
really
off sugar
important.
like that,
Yeah, it's
it's
important.
going to be
Make
it's
your
going
home
to be
environment safe.
so the home environment is very important, and we talk a lot about, again, simple hacks how to do that, whether that's keeping a glass of water in the fridge or glass containers of chopped fruit in the fridge, so that when your kid walks around at break time from school and is looking for a snack, or when I go downstairs in the middle of the day looking for a snack, the default is right there and it's a healthy choice. We as parents have a chance to really control that, more so now than before, actually, in some cases.
And they have the problems themselves with sugar, right? It's not just the kids who are eating it; it's all the grown-ups. It's in everything. It's in your tomato sauce and your ketchup and your salad dressing. It's just hidden in everything. We basically
Yeah,
produce an extra 500 calories of corn syrup every year for every American, and it's in everything. And I don't even understand that, honestly. It's such a problem.
and hidden and disguised with over 200 names for sugar,
Yeah.
which we talk about. And one of the first things we do in the 7-day challenge is have you go through your pantry with your kids, if you can, and look at not just the food labels, the ingredient list, and see if you can spot all the sugars. And just making some of those switches. If you're going on a 7-day challenge without added sugars, you may have to find a new brand of peanut butter or tomato sauce. But that will be a new thing that you will adopt. You probably won't go back to the added sugar version,
Yeah. I mean,
but you'll find tons of sources of added sugar.
it's crazy. I mean, it's just in everything, and we don't even realize what we're eating half the time. And I think it's going to take concerted effort, and people understand. What you said is so dramatic to me. I mean, I've understood this for a long time. I think that you're putting the dots together, showing that it's not just about kids being a little overweight. Maybe they'll lose weight when they get older. They'll grow out of it, which most of them don't. But that it creates permanent damage developmentally, academically, mentally, memory-wise, behavior-wise, affects their future ability to succeed in life, to earn money, to do all sorts of things that we take for granted and think should be our children's birthright. And we are really facing not only threats to our aging population with chronic disease, but what scares me more than anything is really the danger we're putting our children in. And I just wonder, do you think the government is going to pass this into the final guidelines? That the advisory committee is an independent science group. We could say independent. They're a little bit corrupt with food industry money, but I mean, even that won't stop them looking at the science and saying, like, we are killing our future generations. But will the government actually say no? I don't think so.
I don't know. I was reading last night your chapter on some of the history of the dietary guidelines in Food Fix.
It's going to give you nightmares.
I don't know. I'm waiting. I think we're expected to hear the announcement, but I don't know which way it's going to go. I think it was a pretty dramatic piece of advice that was in those scientific recommendations. Is it going to make it? I don't know.
Well, this is amazing work you've done for so long. Thank you for putting it in a great book. It's called Sugarproof. This is Dr. Michael Goran from USC in California. His book, Sugarproof, yes, is about the hidden dangers of sugar that are putting your child's health at risk and what you can do about it. So I encourage you to go pick it up, learn about what you need to do to protect your children and really the future of America and the rest of the world, because this is a slow-moving train that's going to go off the train tracks, and I think cause a lot of destruction. And it's just a really important work, and everybody should check it out. They can go to sugarproofkids.com, sugarproofkids.com to learn more about it. You can follow them on social media at Sugarproof Kids, right? What is the Instagram? Is Sugarproof? Or is it just
Instagram is Sugarproof Kids. Sugarproof Kids is the Instagram. There's a rock band apparently called Sugarproof. All
right, great. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your work. I'm glad to connect with you finally. And anything I do to help you, let me know. And there's a great and free newsletter you can get, a chapter called Smarter Without Sugar. That's great in newsletters with tips and insights and recipes. So I encourage you to check out Michael's work, and your kids will be better for it. You will be better for it. And it really applies to everybody, not just kids. So thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Mark, for having me on. I really appreciate you making the time, and thank you to your audience listening in. A ton of questions there.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Feel free to
feel free. All right, we're going to save this so you can watch it. Don't worry. All right, thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you,
buddy.